Why I showed up in Chicago in 1968.
It was in 68.
When we actually moved there. I had been involved with the Institute since 62. And the national councils and all that stuff and regional this is and recruiting for ours.
Where were you in 62?
At that time, I'd finished, well, I'll step back on that one.
Yeah.
I ran into Matthews when I came to Perkins School of Theology the year after he left. In fact, he left that spring and I got in there in the fall, or that summer I got there in the fall. Started the Faith and Life community in Austin. And so I knew he was in town, so to speak, heard him a couple of times, he would be invited back.
And you were going to Perkins
School of Theology, to go to seminary.
Okay.
Right, to get ordained to be a Methodist minister. After 2 years there at SMU, I got selected to be, at Perkins, to be one of a dozen what they call Danforth seminary internships. It's an internship with each of us, these dozen or so interns, were assigned to a particular campus minister to spend a year, 9 months with them to learn the ropes of campus ministry from professionals who've been in the business for 10, 20, 30 years. And the orientation for that program, where we got to meet our new, mentor for the year and so on, was held in Michigan, and Matthews and Lynn were there. They had agreed with the Danforth Foundation to host somebody from this pool of a dozen. It wasn't me. Claudia and I weren't selected to go there, but we spent 5 days or so with Matthews, etc., and these other campus ministers at this retreat center in Michigan. And we spent an evening with he and Len with about 3 or 4 of us who seemed to be alerting to what he was doing and why, and spent an evening sort of being hustled, and greatly so. Being bombarded by this imagery that he had going for him at the time. And marvelous experience. And so it was like, God, why couldn't we be there instead of where I'm going to Johns Hopkins. Claudia and I went to Johns Hopkins University with a fellow by the name of Dr. Chester Wickwire. Spent a year there. In the middle of the year, we had another retreat. Matthews was there, and Wickwire, and all these others, and so on and back. So a pretty intimate acquaintance. Still at the Faith and Life community. At the end of basically my campus ministry, my seminary, I came back for another year, so I had a 4-year curriculum for counting the Danforth internship at SMU. And so in 62, I came out of there, went back to the Northwest to be ordained and assigned to, in my mind, a campus ministry position. Right? Well, the bishop didn't see it that way. You got to go to a local church first, buddy. Otherwise, you're not going to the campus ministry. Well, I struck my heels on that. I said, look, I've been in training for this. I had a year of training internship. When I came back after the experience at Johns Hopkins, which I became assistant director of the SMU campus ministry, Wesley Foundation, Wesley Club. A guy by the name of Paul Blanton, who's a marvelous guy. I don't know where he is these days, so I was making the case strong and hard. So the compromise was I would go to Ellensburg, where there was a full-time pastor, George Poor, and I would be half-time campus minister and half-time associate pastor at this Methodist church. All right, that'll work. Within a year, I'd recruited 5 other denominations to form an ecumenical body, and so I was full-time in the campus ministry. Now back. I asked myself, why did I get so passionate about, one, the Ecumenical Institute, but stepping back from that, I was involved at Perkins in the civil rights movement. I was involved at my University of Puget Sound in civil rights movement stuff, and anti-war stuff. I had a conscience and was doing battle, so to speak, with these forces as they were. And in fact, I lost my position at Ellensburg after 6 years there because I took 2 of my board of directors to a PLC sponsored by the Ecumenical Institute out here in the Northwest. And the 2 honchos are both of them very religious but good professors. Professor of philosophy, and anyway, it blew their minds. Just blew their minds. They came back rabid, communist, atheist, their brains were just going, you're going to have to deny this. You're out. Oh, God. So I had a special board meetings and stuff, and all of a sudden it became clear to me that this was not going to work, and I was not going to say deny the ecumenical institute. It was just where I was going at the time, and I was, on the way there. And all the time during this period, I was also recruiting RS1s and the PLC and Justin Morrill, and I don't know, I guess he and I were the only ones, and Dell and Claudia at that time. And we had, and the Jenkins showed up in the Northwest, and they came in the middle of the night, stopped, and we didn't know who they were, and said, hey, we've been involved in the Ecumenical Institute. What are you guys doing here? Can we stay and get to working with you? Whatever, recruiting RS1s and so on. So they came out of California, drove up in this old rickety 2-bed car. Anyway, so, and the short of that was that I got, what's the word, chastened for this. Lost my position. One of the last things that the sort of coup de grace in Ellensburg was, I decided we needed to have a demonstration of our support of the civil rights movement. Right?
They had the coffin.
They really got a fist there. Because here we were going down the street, and there were lots of locals out there, throwing eggs at us in the road.
You make the newspaper?
Oh yeah, front page coverage, big photographs, And that wasn't exactly where these guys were coming from. So we went to Ellensburg, end of the road, sort of local church, maybe 80 members, all old wheat farmers in eastern Washington. Wonderful experience. These are great people. Gosh, they were great. Just loved them. Had a wonderful time. Formed a cadre of RS1 grads, about 6 or 8. Anyway, just had a great time. Had some older folks that just sort of took me under their wing, and first year I'm getting into the local church, and they went visiting with me to do the path, and all of a sudden the congregation started growing and growing. Man, I'm a fairly winsome guy, and these guys are just, God, they usually get them at the end of the road. They're about ready to keel over. There was this young Turk coming out of the canvas ministry. Had a great time. At the end of which, it's from December, and all in the meantime, all along this, in the 60s, this is at 67, I was going back to Chicago once, twice a year, maybe 3 or 4 times a year, going for these councils and stuff, planning RS1s and PLCs and helping develop curriculum, getting trained and bum, bum, bum. And so I went back. Anyway, so anyway, we got a phone call asking if we'd be interested in going on an international teaching trek, Claudia and I. Now, Claudia had been back a few times also and all that. And so he said, we've got a local church here. Let's see, and we look around. So I talked to the cadre, and they said, oh, go ahead. We'll help you raise the money. And they did. And they took over the local church, the leadership. For 2.5 months we were gone. Wow. Left in just after the first of the year, and we're gone. Didn't come back till the middle of March. 2.5 months. Went all over across Asia, Japan, Korea, Philippines, Indonesia, name it. We were in about 12 countries. With the McCluskeys and with the Fischels. You may remember them.
Taught my first RS1.
Hey, all right.
Yeah.
Anyway, I had a great time and learned a lot. And anyway, it was something else. And at the end of which, we came back, and every week I sent a big long story and back to the church. They read it from the pulpit, or whatever. And so anyway, at the end of that, when we got back, this is in March or so, and it was only our annual conferences in June, when they make new assignments and stuff. Right. And so we went to work on getting ourselves under special assignment to go to the Ecumenical Institute. Didn't want to leave that local church because that's great folks. Had a great time with them. Decided to do it, did it. They supported it. The bishop said, bye-bye. Bishop Palmer was his name, and he was a
special assignment.
Special assignment. And I don't know, he was something else. He was to be kind. He was a Methodist fascist. Well, he was the bishop, and he was going to tell you what the hell was going to happen. I don't care what you said, sort of thing. So he and I had a few rounds on that one. Anyway, ended up in Chicago, summer '68. And Claudia and I, Claudia had been to helping recruit, and we'd done cadre formation in several places, and we'd go out there and weekly tracks and up, get things going, and all that sort of movement building before we showed up in Chicago. And we came in the front door, and the next day we got our assignments. You may remember these. Claudia got assigned to the kitchen to manage this whole phenomena. We had like 800 people there for that summer program. And in the midst of the riots, we're still there's smoke in the air from the riots. And so my assignment, guess what? The print shop. They figured, look, we need a little training, special training just for us. Morals come back, Justin goes into development, right? They got on the planes, hustling around. I was back there kicking these old machines, trying to get something to print out of them. Great experience. Bill Grow and Bill was not a manager. He was a great printer, but he was not a manager. And so anyway, a lot of stuff happened there. And including midnight treks across Fifth City and as a white man going to the print shop, which at that time was 5 or 6 blocks away, or to the old program center, or whatever we called it at that time, an old building of some kind. Anyway, so spent a year there and printed a lot of materials. I had to get all the seminar course papers, and the Ecumenical Institute News magazine, we sent it out, we did stuff. And Matthews, the time my father died, we did mass,
I was reading all that stuff.
All right.
Yeah.
Just chucking it out.
I was eating it up.
All right, great. Anyway, so that's how we got there. In college, I got in trouble too with the president of the damn college. He had been the president for 20 years or something. Dr. Thomas, president, I forget his name right now, but because of civil rights stuff. I mean, and I had accused him in the college of being racist because they had like 3 African students in this campus of 1,600 students. Something not right. There's not a very good program of integrating this campus and so on. So he had me up about that. Didn't throw me out, but he was a little pissed. And anyway, so I had that kind of evangelism. But where did that come from? My father, as I looked at it over the years, he, during the 20s and into the 30s, he was a logger. He went to 3C camps for a couple of years during the Depression and stuff, and sent $1 a week home to mom, or $1 a day. I don't forget what it was, but like $1 was very much, and just to keep her going, and us that got born along the way. And but anyway, he got involved with the labor movement and breaking the back of this tyranny of the loggers who would just throw bodies away. I mean, some guy get hurt in the woods, get hit with a choker or break a limb or something like that. The guy would say, "Get back to work. We'll take care of it when the day's over, when the shift's over, when you finished your work. Get back out there. You're going to get fired right now." So anyway, one day this guy got hit by a choker coming back. This thing had got him to leave the woods, and hit him bad. But he's alive. And the boss says, "Get back to work. We'll take care of this when the day is over," sort of thing, thinking the guy had died. He came back at the end of the day to pick up his body, and the guy had crawled 100 yards through brush and logs and stumps and stuff, just dragging himself, trying to get to help to get himself back alive. And that triggered Dad, and said, "This is bullshit. I'm going to let this go on." So he got involved in the union movement. He was like the union, whatever, head there in Morton. I knew nothing about that really until later in life, and my mom told me the stories. But I mean, he had a conscience, social conscience, and that's the extent of what he could see to do. was to take on the big timber magnates and try to call them to account for this brutal waste of human life. No, you know, and he knew he'd be in the spot the same way if he got hurt. Sort of. Anyway, so that's where my roots were, that kind of conscience, I guess, of being concerned about other people. And Dad was very much that in terms of the neighborhood and stuff. He'd help people out who had trouble or needed help, you know, go fix something or whatever. Anyway, so that kind of sort of fed into my conscience, and when I went to college, you know, and I got involved both with civil rights and the war movement stuff, and the same in seminary, got involved with demonstrations in the local restaurants and the movie theaters and stuff were getting integrated, so blacks out of the bleachers and able to sit down and have a meal at a restaurant, and got arrested a few times and stuff like that. But here was a channel through which to get to the serious issue of rebuilding society at the grassroots. Not preaching, teaching, sure, to awaken people to get them out there, get out the front door of the church and do something significant about their belief system instead of just sitting there chortling about the problems, you know, or whatever. So, so the Institute was just, you know, that was the only ongoing that I could see that was worth giving up the local church thing or the campus ministry. I found was just an academic exercise and sort of sociological masturbation. You know, isn't it too bad? And oh yeah, we believe in justice and all this, you know. But when they had to come, when it came time to hit the streets, they weren't out there. It was not time for that yet. You know, it's too early or whatever their excuses were. And so it became disgusting and this kind of deceit, self-deceit about their being really concerned about society. And the Institute had a strategy of dealing with the local, because we were very much local people. We were involved in our community, and you know, and the Ritzville experience was wonderful, and at that level, just people's willingness to get out there and do things and help make things happen. So it became logical, and that's what we decided to do. Several things going on sort of converged. Obviously, Matthew's sort of phenomenal grasp of history and the church's mission not being tied into some pious activity but serious social change, and the need to provide a vehicle by which people who cared could get out and do something meaningful. And so we had a global strategy. We had profound insight about our own lives and struggle to be the religious, secular religious, and the non-pious, non-converting evangelical stuff. That was not the stick. It was to help people help themselves and to provide the passion and loving care and tools and methods and stuff that we were doing. And hence we went from recruiting courses to the local church project, and then from there to the human development projects as a way to get this technology out of the Fifth City experiment into the world. And I think it was phenomenal that the convergence of the passion, the religious conviction, without the presence of pietism or evangelism, and the fact that there are people, that the local community can do phenomenal things for themselves, given a few tools and support. And that's a tragedy. We've lost that in your face, so to speak, in the community presence and catalytic behavior happening that we provided by providing those human development projects and then launching into the replication process and stuff and so on. And we were willing to, to live in a pittance and go where the need was, and that was nourishing in itself, because you saw that you could see the change happening, see the transformation of the communities that you're working with, and the new life, both health and spiritual awakenment and stuff. The Maharashtra projects and Philippines, we did 20 some villages, and anyway, so as that weaving of spiritual consciousness or awareness of the need to be the conveyors of hope, of belief, of trust, of ingenuity, and using the talents we had as young people. I mean, I was in By that time I was 30, maybe 29, 30, and so the next 20 years it turned out to be for us the prime of our lives to be doing what we were doing. And we had a tremendous support of colleagues who helped fund this, the Institute. While we did self-help development to pay our own salaries, our own stipends, in our way, we raised a lot of money to get teams on the ground to do the human development projects, to put training available to local people and so on. Claudia and I, for instance, went to this International Training Institute, ITI Trek, in 74, after the local church, maybe somewhere in there, 76 maybe, and trained people by the hundreds in the Philippines and India and so on. The village leadership came through and came forward, and we've helped fund that. I mean, get them a train ticket, get them there and feed them rice and dal for 3 weeks and train them and send them back, with a plan and a commitment, and a cadre formed by bringing 3 or 4 people in the village, and it took off, and so on. Now, how well it was sustained, that's part of the question. You don't know. Some of them went through the sky. This thing, like Cunningham's story about what they did in southern Taiwan, with this shrimp farming. Here was this very hand-to-mouth little fishing village in the southern coast of Taiwan. And within a matter of 2 years, this thing was a multi-million-dollar package of huge expansions of the shrimp. Japanese capital. I mean, we just plugged in the capitalist system in the world. These guys went bananas. So instead of hustling around, with a crutch to get into their work, they were driving Mercedes. Was that transformation? Well, is that what we wanted to have happen? I'm not exactly sure. But it'll be interesting to see what happened to the community. But anyway, there's a huge influx of capital and using their labor and technology to do these jumbo shrimp for the Japanese market. Some places it took off like that, other places it went kaboom, because they did not have really the commitment to maintain the ecumenical presence, so that there was not factionalized into the good guys and the bad guys, whatever stripe they had. And I've not had the money or the time or whatever even to go back and find out what's happened. Some people have, and I'd be interested to see what we found out, if we could find that out, what they discovered in the villages where we were working, in some of them at least. Anyway, but you asked about what made this happen. I think the civil rights movement, just seeing the incredible structural injustice, and that it takes a village to change, to raise a new generation. It takes a caring community, and you had to deal with systems. You had to deal with the Jim Crow stuff that was still rampant across the country, even though we were fighting to get the Civil Rights Movement, the Civil Rights Act, and so on to happen. RS1 just hit at the anger, at least I had, over the piosity of the church and its irrelevance. And to take the theology out of the academics and out of the spiritualist or the evangelical fundamentalism and so on, that still was, or the liberalism of the Methodist Church in its own right, was not translating into action, was only translating into feeling good or being pious or being right or being whatever. But it's not getting people in the civil rights demonstration, was not getting people, in terms of the churches as I experienced it in the Northwest and so on. So just sort of to bang people on the forehead with this explosion of challenging their image of God, Christ, Holy Spirit, and Church. These 4 fundamental sort of dynamics that make up the Christian community, and getting it out of the pious and into the secular, into the functional lifestyle that we attempted to create. The local church experiment, while it was whatever you say about it, ahead of its time or too complicated or what, or the hold of the historic church was still huge on the local institutions, and so they saw to it that anybody got very far into the ecumenical stuff, started talking this local church experiment stuff, got snapped back, and pulled their, so that they lost their positions. They ended up joining the order. A lot of them did. And my experience was not that problem. I was in there earlier before the local church experiment, and it had been fun to do, but I was at that point doing training and prayership of the Cleveland House and bum down the line. So I think it got a hold of the real issues and had the methodology and the sort of secular, hard-driving style that shook people out of their lethargy. They're being trapped in this old world, two-story universe, piosity, and so on. And I don't mean to belabor all that, but it somehow broke that through, and it gave us a tool by which it got people to make a decision, either to get with the program, so to speak, or sit there and know that they've said no to the possibility of making a difference in history. So you had that sort of phenomenon. I had some people, I think of some of these local pastors who decided to say no to the order because they had a power in the church. There was a guy up in North Texas that was so good, Bill Matthews, I think, not Matthews, Bill. Anyway, he was the pastor, and he'd have Paul Tillich come down and do lectures at his church, and so on. But he had a lot of action going on as well. But several of those across the country who are just giants, spiritual and intellectual giants, who we sort of fed them as much as we could because of their importance in terms of showing that the church can be relevant and can talk about the gospel in a secular way, like Tillich and Heber and so on did. Anyway, it's a fundamental tool, and we used it in whatever format we could. The international ITIs had that assumption built into them, that stance. We didn't talk about God, Christ, and Holy Spirit, but you had that freedom to make choices, and that choice to live your life as is given to you, and not be whining about it or whatever, and so on, and be formed into a cadre and do something, and so on. And that the life, the mystery, this is where we get into this other dimension of the ongoing value of the RS1, is the fact that it's a trigger. It was a trigger for me, and I think for most everybody, to get out of the stranglehold of the historical church on religion. Where I've gone, it's a whole another layer we want to get into. I don't know, but I cannot sit through a traditional service in a Methodist church or any other kind that I've run into yet. I haven't found a church up here, except the Unitarians. At least they've got their heads screwed on in terms of perception of reality, and the fact that we, as awakened people, are concerned, are involved in making things happen. And so they're the one here, we go to, not every Sunday, but at least once a month, I think now. But it's great, and they're on the front lines of dealing with some of the issues of our day, and having rallies and support. You look at the leadership of Whatcom County and the city of Bellingham, and half of them are members of that church, just because they're getting people out there in a sophisticated but passionate way to bring about social change. And that's great, I think. He was obviously a mentor. He was this inspiration. He had a vision and a mind that could integrate information and theologically and sociologically and so on into practical format, practical wisdom, and helped us build the Fifth City model, and helped us build the local church experiment model and the human development model. Obviously had a lot of other people involved, but it was his pushing to get practical in ways that can win and cause significant change, build on the capacity of local people to care for themselves or to to make things happen. I mean, all the stuff we did with the ecclesiolas and the other world and the new religious mode, new social vehicle, was pushing it, giving a whole new framework for society. And that's what we had in the order, and I think, and we're working out of that, learning from what we're doing and trying to refine that model. And the fact that he died when he died, and we did not have a viable transitional process to maintain the momentum. I mean, there wasn't the intellectual capability of anybody in the room to carry that on. And we didn't have a sociological connection like the Panchayat was and so on, that would generate fresh, global, profound awakenment and feed the rest of us. And I wasn't about to say, Hilliard, you can take it from here, or name whoever, you know. People are vying to take Matthew's place. And I said, not on my watch, you know, I'm out of here if that's what it takes. And I mean, if that's where you're going. But anyway, so, but the thing that kicked us in the britches relative to the order was that we spent our order savings, which we did a good job of making, several $1 million in reserve. We committed it to the human development projects and didn't have the momentum in that arena to get the replacement of the money we fronted into that very expensive, getting teams of people and all the work it took to set up a human development project and sustain it beyond just the staff that was there. Bankrupted us relative to our capacity to handle my life and my wife's life, who, as you know, Claudia was an epileptic and whatever, and I was concerned about taking care of her as well as myself. So we finally came out of to get to work and make some money. I think we lost the confidence in the group to have the visionary dynamic in the, you know, and didn't have a way to say it's not going to happen again anyway. So what do we do with what we got? We sort of felt like, well, if there's nobody there, then we'll just pull back. We were in the order 20 years, but 2 years, the last 2 years, we spent 1 year in LA and 1 year in the Seattle house, and then we went independent. So 20 years, 68, 88, 86. 86 is when we that's not mathematically correct. Anyway, somewhere like that. Yeah. But we came back, and I decided when I was in LA to begin to form something that would be a secular version of the order relative, I mean ICA, relative to corporations, to try to take, and I formed ICA Associates, and had a couple, 3 people, and I worked together on that, and, to try to make money. 20 years of life, we had a $7,000 chunk between Claudia and I. That was not going to go very far. And we didn't believe that if we stayed there, we could make enough money as an ICA, you know, and sort of marketing lens or whatever we were doing at the time to make it work. And we were just, you know, neither of us had any resources besides what we had in our pocket. You know, that little bit came with them. Anyway, so we left the order and went to this journey on ICA Associates, etc. We've had the ICA Associates for 2 or 3 years. Then we formed a group. We joined a group called, that was in the LA Basin, ProSource. And we opened an office for ProSource and marketing. Basically, the ICA stuff only was in their framework, and it was their secular rendition. And then that went for a couple of years, and then Sherry Lockman and I decided to form, I forget the name we gave it now, but something like that we could, we got very much involved in all the consulting businesses and, you know, going to their meetings and stuff, and got quite a few contracts and made some money, but not in the magnitude. So finally I had a chance to teach management development at at Bates Technical College in Tacoma. Was there for 2 or 3 years, and then an opportunity came to go to Boeing and work for 3 years. I think it was 3 years in their total quality management thing, in which they hired 6,000 staff, people like me, had to get us all on the same page, and then go out and train management in TQM, the Japanese, the big thing of the day. And so at the college and at Boeing, I made some serious money, relatively speaking. And so at the end of that time, I decided I was just after the Boeing. Then anyway, Boeing called that into being, trained us. We went out and taught and just did masses of 5 seminars a week, and which you're up and teaching and all this sort of stuff. And then they said, all right, that's it. And all of us were fired. And in a matter of a month or two, we had 6,000 of us walked out the front door. I said, I'm going to do something else besides this consulting shit. I was not good at marketing. I was a good facilitator. Cunningham, in fact, got me in several gigs. I did with him. We had fun together. He's such a great spirit. And so I decided to do handyman. In fact, Jan and David were my first clients. They had a shed they wanted to build on, or they wanted something painted, or but anyways. Every organization has its jargon. Be it a local church, it's got its own little unique ones, or a historical church certainly got its jargon. And obviously there's a hell of a lot of controversy over the meaning of that jargon. Depending on your left, right, center, whatever, in terms of the institution that you're belonging to. And that was true of the Institute that we had. But it's creating the language that makes sense to you and that you think can help communicate the values and the insights or the whatever to somebody else that's not simply repeating the same line. Well, remember Jesus? Yeah, well, he's my Savior, right? You're your Savior. And there you go. Often jumped off the cliff. If you don't have a way to break that addiction to an image of whatever, God, Jesus, name it. And the same with the story of what we're trying to help people do. You can't say, we want to have an ecumenical gathering here. Well, if you can talk about, you want to get the Muslims, the Hindus, the pagans, whatever, around the table to do this village development project. So you got to find some other ways to say it than to get them off into another world that's alien or hostile toward them. And so, so we tried to create the language that made sense to us as we created these forms and these ideology, if you call it, theology, sociology, and that it goes with the territory. And the question is, does it bother people? Well, I'm sure people who are locked into this saw this as an alien force out there, coming after them with their buzz bomb or whatever it is going to kill their images that they've lived out of for all their lives. Are going to at least wound it or challenge them. And right now, this phenomenal, in this country, battle over what does it mean to have a country, to have a viable nation that can communicate and make decisions and not just scream at each other and call each other names and think we've done something. And it's a phenomenal moment in history. And it's going to see how we come out of this. If there's ever a point at which you come back to the question of what's the truth, what really happened. I'll tell you what really happened. And so on, get out of these traps we're sort of walking into or are locked into, a lot of us. And who's going to carry the day? Obviously Obama, God bless his soul, got out of that swamp and somehow got a different language, a different image of what it means to be caring for this nation's leadership and not have to get into this trench fighting over, whatever, military spending or name the issues he could have gotten trapped in, and he got elected. And he's doing stuff that just continues to challenge that ideology, theology, sociology that this country is in, and it's getting screams out of the radical right and the conservative wind. Anyway, so jargon goes with the territory. It's a tool. If it gets in the way, you got to change it. I mean, if it's in terms of what your mission is, or what you're trying to do. I think where history is going, is in the direction of call it Buddhism, or the culture of standing before the mystery with an open heart, an open mind, and responding and discerning your own gift, insight, task, mission, and so on. I don't think it's, the attempts to create a movement, a social change movement. You think, well, you go back to think of what's going on in, Tibet, obviously, but also in Southeast Asia with the Buddhist monks out there, getting shot and murdered and thrown in the ditch because they're on the other side of social change or want to bring about change when the establishment doesn't want that to happen. That there is that kind of movement that's just raw guts to say, hell no, I'm not going to let you continue doing this if it costs me and all my colleagues our lives. Hopefully there's somebody in the world we'll see and come back and break the chain, if you want to call it that, the chains of these oppression. So there's that dimension, but the other one is that, I don't see, if you want to call the ICA, Order Ecumenical ICA, a movement, that movement, I don't know what it would look like, I don't, other than the call to embrace your life as it's given to you and gather the resources, the insights, like the Shambhala magazine does, it tries to do, and there's a number, and we go to Buddhist, Jan goes more than I do, a center here and sort of in the neighborhoods around Bellingham, because it's the only thing that makes sense. It's the only thing that makes sense to us. And I go occasionally, but we've gone to several, a Shambhala group and so on. But it's that sort of low-key, serving you the freedom to choose and form the theology, if you care, the imagery that allows you to access the spirit, the mystery, the glory of living, and so on. It's strange. It's interesting. I just 3 days ago picked up Merton, and hadn't looked at him for years since he left the order, and just done a search. I'm right now in the process of recreating my own self story and the rest of my life, however long it's going to be. Deal with that contingency. And one of the things that I'm exploring is the power of poetry to release me to say what I want to say that's not just repeating what it's not. It's not, traditional Christianity, it's not pietism, it's not whatever it is. And it's certainly not our jargon. Even though it can inform us, the other world stuff is great, and if you got the discipline to go through it and learn it and use it, it's great. It's a tool, a set of tools. At least for those of us who had some affinity to it at some point. But I think the convergence of the cutting edge, if you call it that or whatever, of the front of the movement toward collaboration or consciousness sharing or common morality or whatever. And I think the United Nations, God bless its soul, is a vehicle by which that's happening also, because you take the variety of great people who are, you go all the way from South Africa with Mandela and, this group of a dozen of these guys who are out there trying to communicate a different image of the world than most of our nations have been raised on or whatever. It's a great tool, and they're trying to raise the questions that need to be raised for the next generation, I think, as one form of that. And it's tragic that Pope John, the movement that started, has run into this kind of unbelievable catastrophe that the church has let go on for decades, and is not, the Catholic Church, and has not yet gotten a hold of. Though the last few things the Pope has said have been helpful, it seems like he's getting it, more or less.
Yeah.
It's our problem, not yours, and you didn't cause it, we did. Thank you. That's a form of confession. That's unusual. What about the Protestants? My experience is so disheartening because I just haven't found that much yet. I'm not looking that hard either anymore because I've sort of given up, thinking that there's somebody that's not a two-story universe that is docking the dialogue with the spirit at a different level than the third story or this two-story universe, and so on, and is turning that into insights and passion for caring for the world around them in such a way that they're getting away from coming to church to somehow get something better later on, and that image of what the church is about. So where's it going to come from is what the question is. Where is the spiritual awakening? What set of tools do you need to use, or do we need to use, as whatever embers there are of the movement, to get some form, some shape, God bless John Cock and the revised RS1s and others. I don't know who else is doing that, but I haven't been to it, but it sounds like it's pretty well in this direction too, in terms of getting some other images besides refurbishing Christian imagery to talk about the mystery and the other world. Jan and I are running dialogue. This is great. I'm having a great time with her on this. We are together. Of what is the next phase of our lives? And I think I've just moved here a couple years ago. We've got a few neighbors we've met, some old friends down the street, and so on. Do I want to get involved in the Democratic Party here? I got involved with Move On for about 6 months and sort of said, I can do this. I've done it. Let's let the next generation. I want to do something else besides be the social change agent or whatever out there that they're needing to get something to happen. I do my sending off emails to the president and all these causes. The Save the Wolf, save the. Add my little. My little email note to them I probably do that a dozen times a week. Because this is a slow end commitment, and we send money every year to a dozen or maybe 6 or 8 groups that we think are critically and doing good work. But we're not interested in trying to, start become the new or whatever. In the community. So we're doing a lot of reading and writing, or at least I'm working on what it means. My propensity, as Jan will tell you in spades, is to sort of take my Methodist ministry preaching thing, and not deal with the fact that you don't tell somebody what to think or believe. You can obviously raise questions, you can sort of bombard them with options and so on, but that isn't transformative. What does transform people? What does invite them onto the journey or deeper in the journey? And when you come out the other side of getting a hold of where your life is and some positive sense that you're doing where you're going is the right direction, how does it show up? In what behaviors, and so, I'm trying to deal with my being in the 4th phase, to use ICA jargon. I'm 74. People are dying all the time, a little younger than I am. and I'm healthy and I could live another 20, 30 years. My dad lived, even though he had Alzheimer's. He lived for 10 years. The pastor wouldn't give up. whatever's down in there, he's going to come back, keep going. And I think I've got that in me somehow. But what does that mean in terms of this 21st century imagery of what it means to be caring people and to be spiritually alive and able to communicate with other people at some new level, so that there's a community that emerges who share values, who share jargon, who share imagery, who share commitments, who share beliefs. And what's it look like for them to get together? Well, they go to a church, or they take over a church, or they.
What is a church?
Or what is the gathering place? Where and what's it do? Obviously, as you get generations involved, you're going to get people going to say that we've got to get out there and get involved in the community. I mean, good God, that's what we're about. And I'm at the point of saying I want to be involved in articulating the poetry, the imagery of tomorrow, the next generation. And that takes me getting inside of my life, my being, and getting a way to articulate that in such a way that it's not some goddamn sermon or some indicative statement, you ought to be this, or life is good, isn't it, or life is good. That's not it. Even though that assumption is there in whatever I'm going to do, that RS1 is at the foundation of my being, and whatever I come up with is going to be an addition of that, or a morphing of that, or a rearticulation of something like that. Anyway, so we're in that stage in my life, at least. I think the challenge, in addition to my getting my own life and my own sense of being able to articulate at a different level, who I am and what life is about, and what my insights about, or whatever wisdom gets said, is the sociological form. So I'm awakened, or whatever you want to call it. So I get a hold of this question and grapple with it and come up with some clarity or some mechanism by which to articulate that. What is a sociological form? You and I get an email and we communicate this stuff, or Mary Ellen or whoever, or get a hold of a cadre of people across the country or globe who's working on this stuff, or what? And what is this stuff we're working on? That's the question you've got, is how will you define the game, the parameters of the game, so to speak, that we're going to need to play to come up with something that's going to give this planet a new way to say, hey, we're alive and we're going to make it, thank you, and here's how. For me, that's a critical factor beyond the individual turns that all of us have got to take. We can't just fall back on RS1 re-imaging or re-talking about that, I don't think. And while that understanding of life is fundamental, there's got to be other poetry, other imagery, other whatever that gets us to communicate with a larger chunk of the planet than ex-order members.
That's right. Heard fewer all the time.
For our daily office, for Jan and I, and we're forming it, and it's, we haven't got clear that we walk most every day. Rosie's got to go, we've got to go, we're going to stay alive, we're going to take care of our bodies and use, it's the part of the equation of staying alive and healthy. But we also read poetry to each other, or we'll study a book together. We will meditate, 30 minutes, 40 minutes sort of meditation. None of these every day, but some flow of those. And we share our own thinking. I mean, we're, in that sense, we're spirit partners, or what I call it, because we're trying to get a hold of this thing, and she's in this similar struggle or pathway, which is great. We go to these meetings, and I mean the Buddhist and so on, and I don't know, there's too much ritual. You got, and it's all in Japanese, or it's all in Hindu, or it's all in something else, and you're sitting there trying to figure out what the hell this meant.
Yeah.
And I haven't taken time to get involved, so
Right.
after a few months, maybe you'll be able to get a hold of
there's a
what they're
word,
saying. Yeah, right. What was that word anyway? I'm sure this is profound, but I sure am not getting it. Anyway, struggling with that, and each of them have got their own sort of unique sets of jargon, sets of rituals, sets of whatever. My night times are interesting for me. I have unusual, I mean not unusual, I have dreams. I dream and I'm more conscious of dreams and, and so on. I'll dialogue with my dreams and wake up enough to say, what's going on here, and then my dream will sort of help me see, whatever. Dream work is important, but it's a silent, solitary ritual or activity. For me, so silence in the arena of contemplation is just listening and looking, seeing it in a different way, whatever it is, be it you or my wife or a tree or whatever. And that's again the poet's genius, is the capacity to see and then let that sort of swirl into a magical perception, articulation of that. And then the battle with how do I care for other people, the prayer end of it. I mean ourselves, let alone other people. And given my health, given my whatever I am, given my perception and energy level, like the guy next door over here, 2 days ago, woke up, we were sort of getting up, and all of a sudden looked out there and there was an ambulance, medic guy, and I've waved at the guy, his name's Steve, and we mow our lawns about the same time, and we have never sat down to talk. We've never even talked. We've just said, "Hi, I'm Don. What's your name, Steve? I'm good to see you. We'll see you around." So, well, the guy shows up, being an epileptic all of his life, says his mom and dad, who I met yesterday, and he had a particularly. I mean, his parents sort of check in on him and stuff. They live in the area. And they came over on a Monday morning, and he was still where they put him the night before after he'd been out, and he'd had a seizure then, and then he was still in bed, covered up, or on the floor, face down. And God, we better call the ambulance. They did, and he's all right. But what's it mean to have a community of people who care geographically? I mean, he's my neighbor. What's that mean to do that? So I called up, whatever, left a note on the door. The dad called, we talked. And so on. And maybe something will happen, maybe not. But what would happen would be helpful. I don't know. But maybe it's going to be the neighborhood again, the parish. And this community does a great job of that, relatively speaking. One of the reasons we're here is because we know there are a number of people, and they're just great people. They're involved, and they're caring, and they'll do stuff for you if you need it. But it's not, like organized, whatever, though there are community meetings and stuff. So, silence and observing or listening and stepping out into the neighborhood. It's one thing to say silence or listening or observing. It's another thing to develop the skills. Sam Green, example of this. He says, he was talking about the methodology of being a poet and so on. He says, I go out the front door and I list 10 things that I see, 10 things that I hear, 10 things that I smell, 10 things that I taste, right there. Then I'll walk 100 feet and I'll do it all over again. He said, try it sometime. Be amazed what it does. Make notes of what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're feeling, you're sensing. But anyway, that kind of training in just being aware of the universe as it shows up in your life and beyond. Being raised in a logging community, in a logging family, And being around that, you live by the sweat of your brow, literally. I mean, they work their asses off every day, 6, 7 days a week, and so on. And the farming, my dad was a lumberjack, and I did the family farm primarily. Most of my older, when I was about 10, I think we moved back to a farm. I started out the first several years of my life on a farm. It was just a homestead, and there was not much I could do. I mean, just a little tight, except to grow up. The memories of stuff that happened then, but anyway, then the respect of nature, the joy that it gives you to experience the unbelievable magnitude of mountains or valleys or rivers or animals and stuff. That just sort of awesome relationship to. And my climbing, which I didn't really do much of it until I did climb Mount St. Helens when I was in college. Got a taste of what it means to do climbing of snow-covered, ice-covered mountains, and loved it. But then went off to Dallas and seminary, but when I came back to the Northwest, then I got in with some rock climbing guys at Ellensburg, and learned a lot. And about, I guess it's, mountaineering is listening, is seeing, is paying attention in spades, because your life depends on it, and your partners. So like when Mount Stewart was the go-to mountain to climb from Ellensburg, because it's just granite, one of the few raw granite mountains in the Northwest. And we had climbed a pitch up to the top of Mount Stewart, and we're coming back, 3 of us. And I was probably the most experienced guy in the bunch. But we came over there's chutes that come down. You look at Mount Stewart, there's just big chutes that sort of come down all along. They got ridges of rock, and then there's chutes, and there are ridges and chutes and stuff. And some of the chutes go all the way from the top to the bottom, and you see this white, and the snow's on it, white. So we got onto the top of the chute, coming off of being at the summit of mountain. And it's a 9,000 foot mountain. Yeah, 9,000. And you climb 5,000 feet from the base of it. To get up to the top, it's a 5,000 foot ascent. And you have to hike down to get to the ascent and come back up. And we got on, decided, let's glissade. Glissade means sort of sit down and slide in the snow and see how it goes. And we knew there was a break somewhere down there, because we saw it across there, sort of like a little cliff. You dropped across, you could see rocks underneath the snow, so you had to be careful for that. And we stepped out, we got a lot, we roped up, we had ice axes, we had all the equipment and stuff, good gloves and all that. And then all of us know how to do self-arrest, where you can roll over and stop yourself from going, and hopefully save others from going if they get out of control. And had been trained and all that stuff, and crevasse and so on. Anyway, so we started down the chute. It wasn't any wider than this room is this way, going down like this steep as this, and stepped out on that. One guy, it's 2 guys. I was the anchor guy, and back, and I was sort of like with the brakes. If there's any brakes in this thing, I had to put the brakes on. Anyway, we got going about 100 feet down this thing, and all of a sudden I noticed, excuse me, that the snow is moving with me. Us. We were in an avalanche. I don't know why this happens. I yelled avalanche and rolled over, drove my ice axe in, and then swung them into the rocks to my right. And we got up out of the avalanche. He went on ahead of us, and it took out about 40 acres of timber below. Just huge, because we just triggered a massive avalanche on the mountain, because it was early in the summer or spring weather, and so on. So you say, shit, if we hadn't stopped then, 2 more minutes, we'd have been out of control. We just shot down like thing and been right in the front of that thing and just splat. Anyway, we stopped, got out, and then hiked down, but stayed on the rock. And of course, by that time it was pretty well cleared out because it took so much snow with it. But you learn to be observant and to know that you're on the edge of being killed or getting yourself killed. But there's a mystery to that. There's there's an intrigue to that. You can make it if you're careful, and if you play your cards right, if you use your equipment, you use your mate, you use whatever, to be a successful climb, summit, and get back down. Getting back down often is the worst because you become careless, relatively speaking. You've made it, you're going home, let's get out of here, and bum, you start not paying attention. Anyway, it's training in that kind of discipline. Life and death situation, and danger everywhere, at the same time magnificence everywhere. Anyway, so I love the mountains. I love to go hunting, fishing, hiking. I go with my son. We have a wonderful time every year. It's one of those things that, it's just so powerful for me. And then once a year, Dustin and Mark and I go out on, like we just went to out on the Pacific coast here, to the Olympics, and went hiking down to on Shai Beach, to the Point of the Arches, which is huge stacks, these big rocks standing out in the ocean and stuff, and spent 2 nights out there and hiked, a few miles, but just the awesomeness of being present to nature. And then the waves, it was like we're at the end of a storm, huge waves. You look out and the tide's going out, you can hardly see the sea out there, it's way out. We went to bed that night, woke up in the middle of the night with this thundering, thought, God, what's going on here? Got up in the morning. We said, well, it's all right, we're not, we're up on the bank quite a ways. And the sea had come all the way up within 5 feet of where we were sleeping, even though we were 20 feet from the beach. The elevation-wise, it just... If we'd been down on the edge of the beach, hopefully we'd have woken up enough to crawl up out of it. But if we'd not been, a big wave came through, it'd have taken us right out of there. It created a foam. The way we could tell this was that it created a foam. It had thrown the foam up almost right into where our fire pit was. Another thing is it has, I use the word stamina sometimes on it. If you're climbing, or when you're climbing, you can't say, God, I'm tired, I want to go back. I'm going to stop. At least I never have. Some people do. You got to go. You're going, And you're in a team that they depend upon you and you depend on them, and you can't just sort of take off walking down the mountain. Shit, you end up in a crevasse or something. Anyway, so stamina is a great word for me in terms of being in the mountains. I've lost several friends in the mountains. Some dumb things that they made or did or whatever. Or some just accidents that, rocks fall off, and bang, they're gone. So there's that kind of history of awesomeness and respect for nature. Anyway. Well, the phrase we used is a cheat to do that, then I'll go back on it.
That's okay.
Willing one thing
Yeah.
is how we define chastity. Had nothing to do with sexuality, had nothing to do with anything else, just had to do with willing one thing. And so I would take my grandson, great grandson, on a hike. and say, look, do you want to go on this hike? We're going to go a long way. We're going to go 20 miles. Can you do it? Oh, yeah. Okay, let's go. And, or whatever, 10 miles, 5 miles, something that's going to push him, depending on his age and his capacity and so on, as to how much of a push he'd need. And I would say, I want you to I want you to be clear that you're choosing to do this. I'm going to go with you. We're going to go together. We'll have fun. We're going to do all that. But you're going because you chose to go, and it's going to be a long hike. And you're going to get tired. You're going to get hungry. Maybe you may get hurt. But you're going to go until we get out of there alive together on your own 2 feet. All right? Now we'll do some first aid, and we'll do some accident, all that, so in case if something does happen, he knows what to do in case I get hurt. But so it's training somebody with experience and keeping focused and not letting yourself destroy your capacity to deliver the energy, the skill, the stamina that it takes to get there, to do what you said you're going to do. But then that demands of him the will and to go work through the pain or whatever it is, fatigue, stress, of going long farther than he thinks he can do. And I may end up carrying him out of, that's fine, but if, it's the experience of pushing yourself to the edge of your limits and staying with it and not saying, I can't do it anymore, Grandpa, or whatever. That's not an option. Can't do it anymore. You can. I want to see you deliver on that commitment. Well, my primary tool for training people in spirituality, I think of my granddaughter or grandson, is to take them into nature. And hopefully they will experience the awe, and the wonder, and the love of this planet, or of this world. You can generalize out of this trip we take, or hike, or whatever. Because on those hikes we do a lot of talking about these things. I think, finally, society, to hell with it. This planet's going to make it. You can't, you're not going to destroy nature. You may impair it, you may slow it down, you may redirect it somehow, by mutations of genes and whatever. I'm pushing it too far now, but anyway, I'm willing to raise the questions, and have done with them, about what is it that keeps you going, and that's how do you go about finding where your passion is, and that's a passion that has to do with caring, not just a passion to suck on popsicles, but in fact to take care of this planet in whatever practical way you can, and to do it out of respect and out of love and out of caring, not out of I ought to or I'd better, but because you're grounded in love and care and giving back. Not just when you get to be a billionaire, then you can give back, to the Buffett routine, or the, God bless him, and Gates and so on. But so it's like getting that challenge into their life early in the game. I'm sure you've a lot of experience with that. I know you have. And guide them in that. By the questions you ask, and by the resources, like, Monica was looking around what to do for a break in her college, and and finally she found her own thing that was great to do. We thought, you know, Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, or whatever, you could go in any 1,000 not-for-profits out there, and she found one. That's great, she did it. And she could teach. I mean, she could learn Spanish by teaching Spanish, or in the case of in Africa, teaching English to them. And that's great. I mean, she was in the village, and that was a value. And that for me would be another value, is to get our kids in the village with some role other than be accompanying us as we take them around and show them the village. Have them experience the pain of it and whatever, the wonder at it, as well as the tragedy of it, where most of them are just, you know, victims of a system that's coughing out sickness and anger and so on. So that'd be another, in terms of our younger people, is to get them out in the world. That's not just this country. I feed my kids, my grandkids, stuff I get on the email on climate change or, you know, whatever. Trying to give them background, because, you know, unless you're paying attention to that stuff, you don't see it. Right. And I try to help get them to pay attention to it by sending it to them at least, and then saying, give me some feedback on this or whatever. Does it make a difference? We'll find out. And I mean, obviously not doing a major effort at that. Haven't really been camping on their doorstep. Though we do things a couple, 3 times a year, where there's a chance to seriously talk to each other about what's important. The thing I worry about the most, like for instance, Jan's godson, Russell, or my own grandson, Dustin, or Monica. I'm pleased with Monica, what she's doing. It's great. Now, she had to have parents who could afford to put her out there and take care of her doing that and all that. But how do we get people, our next generation, trained in seeing reality in the community, like institutionalized racism, be it for women, the ceiling, go down the list of social issues, but to side on the people who are getting the worst of it, the poorest, as opposed to, well, it's their own fault, or they had it coming, or whatever sort of stuff that people sometimes pull out of their pocket to justify in fact they're not taking it seriously, because it's not my problem. It is your problem. This planet's your problem. It is your problem to solve. And I want to know what you can do about it. What are you going to train yourself in? I said that to Dustin, the last thing I wrote down. I want to know where you're going to go to feed the hungry. And not just feed the hungry, but deal with structures where people can have their own, can create food, can generate their own food, and be healthy. Or racism, or anger, sociological anger. People so pissed off that they'll do anything, they'll kill people. How are you going to deal with rage? That kind of stuff. And sure, you got to make money, but if that's the purpose of your life, you may as well cash it in now with the shit. Is to just be comfortable and be able to do crazy things, and I think that's tragic. So I want to know what your plan is to solve the problems of the planet. Because why? Because you care for it. Because it's your planet. Because if you don't, who is? Sort of thing. And so Dustin and I have had that conversation. I haven't had it with Russell. And Jan has had some of it, I'm sure, with him. But he goes up the mountains almost every weekend to go skiing, snowboarding. He loves it. God bless him. He likes to climb. He likes to work out. He likes to do. Does he show at peace rallies, or doesn't have time for it? He's in college. How do you create a conscience in our next generation that's planetary, that deals with the real issues, not just the surface issues. And that empowers people to live great human lives, spirit-filled lives, who can listen, who can learn, who can care for each other, because they have some sense of destiny about it, some sense of, if not me, who? And that was part of the Institute's capability, is to say, if it's not you, who the hell's it going to be, Cramer? You know, you got to get with this program or not, you know. Or Matthew's going out on the front porch of the old Fifth Cities, you know, the big, and saying, well, Don, what's it going to take to get you in here? When can we expect you here? And now the question is, to whom are you going to say that, and to what are you going to invite them now? I mean, then it was clear.
Yeah.
You know, we had some options. And it was a choice to do something meaningful, to deal with the fundamental contradictions of our society, spiritually, physically, sociologically. So that's, you know, that's where I struggle the most, is I don't see the movement yet. And such a way that there'll be a transforming process going on, people getting involved, and, you know, is it the Democratic Party? Or join the Sarah Palin Club.